Okay then, hi everyone. So today we're going to be having a look at the characters in Inspector Calls. I'm just going to take you through each of the major characters. We're going to look at some quotes, look at some adjectives as well, and just give you kind of a good idea of, some opinions on the characters. Whether you've read it yet or whether you haven't, there will be some spoilers. I strongly suggest you use this video as a means of creating more revision resources based on this. Okay. So all the images are going to be taken from that you see today are going to be taken from the BBC adaptation of Inspector Calls. That is actually a really well made one, but there is a slight issue with the portrayal of Eva Smith stroke Daisy Renton, which I'll talk about later on, but that is a really good one if you can get your hands on it. It's quite well made compared to, there's a free one on YouTube. So yeah, if you want to try and locate that one, by all means do. Okay, so we'll start off with Mr. Birling then. I remember when I studied this when I was 16, I had a full-on hate for Mr. Birling. I feel like it's shifted more towards Eric as I've got older, but there is still a disdain for Mr. Birling there. He's very materialistic in terms of he's very driven by money and by kind of his status as well. And that idea of almost kind of the way he collects accolades, the like Lord Mayor, he's still on the bench, even though they're not real things. It's still kind of like he's still materialistic over these symbolic things as well, that he's been in the past, and he's still kind of holding on to that. In terms of being possessive, the way he talks about Sybil, for example, he says, why are you questioning my wife like that? You could say, that he's loving, but because of everything else, we kind of see it in more of a negative way. That kind of ties into his antiquated, to his old-fashioned views about women. The way he talks about, clothes being a symbol of a token of their self-respect, whereas, nowadays we wouldn't see it in that way. We would just kind of see it as clothes as a reflection of someone's personality, not as a representative of their self-respect. So it's quite old-fashioned. He's quite naive. That's the word I think I always used to try and think when I was younger. Oh, like he's not very savvy in a way, because he's not able to think about like the world wars and looking forward. Obviously, this was written in 1945, but set in 1912, so 2 years before World War One. In his mind, like this war was never going to happen. So he's a little bit naive, because if you've studied history, there was a kind of long build up to World War One, and a lot of things had gone on, and it would seem that he's kind of either not aware of it, or he's very narrow-minded and kind of wants to ignore it. Obviously, things like the Titanic, there's no way he could predict that it was going to sink. But it's quite it's clearly put in there for a reason by Priestley, because we want to have that dramatic irony as an audience, that we know that he's going to be wrong about it. Okay. I will say a quick note, I'm talking about these characters like they're real. They're not. Obviously, whenever you're writing up an essay, you always talk about them as, Priestley presents Mr. Birling as, Priestley demonstrates that Mr. Birling is very naive through the use of. So I'm kind of talking about them like they're real just in this video, but you would make sure that when you're writing it, very much continue to keep referencing back to Priestley, because Priestley is that puppet master. He's very pretentious, he's very ignorant, kind of to the plight of Eva Smith. He's also ignorant towards the end of his own kind of dealings in it, and kind of pushes it away. He's unfeeling and quite callous and quite cold. When they ask for more money, he fires them. So we want to think about what that tells us about him as a person. He's very greedy, and I always struggle saying this, but I believe it's avaricious. So yeah, he's very greedy. So he wants Sheila and Gerald to get together just so that he's able to further his own business interests. He's more bothered about that than he is about his own daughter's happiness. So think of what that tells us about him as a person. Note these are all negative. If you can find more positives, you could say that he's quite protective of his family. He wants to protect them from scandal, but at the same time, he's the one that says, a man needs to put himself and his family first. So you could say like maybe he looks after himself more, or whether he is quite protective of his family, that could be more a positive thing. Remember, if you've looked at my perceptive analysis video, it's all about looking at the flip side, so trying to think of everything positives about the characters as well. And here's a couple of quotes you might want to note down. A man has to make his own way. Unsinkable, absolutely unsinkable. And they talked about it simple as my wife, so that possessive pronoun there, my, informing us that he is quite possessive. Okay, so if I were you, I would take a couple of quotes down, maybe try and explode them. I have got a task at the end of the video for you to check out as well. So it's up to you how you want to do it. Okay, then so Mrs. Birling, I love her kind of pose in this. It's very like staged. So Mrs. Birling is super pretentious. You're going to see some similarities for the adjectives from Mrs. Birling and Mrs. Birling because they very much are kind of two sides of one coin. They're very similar in some ways, which is why they're a good match. If any of you have read or watched Macbeth, to me, they're almost kind of reminiscent of Lady Macbeth and Macbeth. How that they're kind of like a duo that really go together very well. So in terms of Mrs. Birling, and for me, she's more unfeeling and more callous and more cold than Mr. Birling. She's actually described in the stage directions as being very cold as well. And I've just put it there on the quote, the second quote down, a rather cold woman and her husband's social superior. She's also greedy in terms of not just when it comes to money, but she's also she's quite, I would say, quite greedy of people's kind of attention and their and the way that she wants people to see her. She's quite demanding in that respect, in that respect as well, because she wants people to see her in a certain way. She wants to be treated in a certain way. So for me, it's not just greedy kind of with money. For her, it's more greedy of she desires things from people in the way that she's treated, and to me that's why she's quite greedy, if that makes sense. She's quite oblivious of when the inspector's kind of baiting her and drawing her in to talk about the father of the child as being this terrible person. Sheila's much more switched on and realizes before everyone else what's going on. She's kind of oblivious to it, and she's like, yeah, absolutely, like it's all the child's father's problem, yeah, blame it all on him, go and find him. And she's very oblivious to all that, probably because she's so superficial and kind of sucked into her own world that she's not really looking outwards and thinking what else is going on and what's going on in her son's life as well. And also in Sheila's life, at no point does she talk about last summer when Gerald didn't come anywhere near Sheila. It feels like she's either quite oblivious or purposefully ignores everything else that's going on. She's quite rigid. Her worldview is very fixed. She's not very malleable. She's not very impressionable. She doesn't change throughout the course of the text. She does show some remorse, and she's upset when she finds out about killing, not killing, but leading to Sheila's Eva Smith's suicide, and the fact that Eva Smith was carrying her grandchild. But quite quickly that's forgotten. Quite shockingly, that's how quickly she forgets that. And she's quite negligent as well. She neglects her duty to help the poor as the chairwoman of the Bromley Women's Association organisation. She's quite negligent because she doesn't help Eva Smith out, so she neglects her duty there. She talks about Eva Smith as a girl of that class, the emphasis there on being that, the lower classes. Again, a rather cold woman. And then this one I always quite enjoy, that I consider is a trifle impertinent inspector. Even the fact that she's a trifle impertinent, she's like, you're being a little bit rude, which basically means like you're being super rude to me. And again, her being quite greedy in terms of demanding that respect. Because she is a social superior to everyone in the room except for Gerald. So she's very, kind of very uppity, very pretentious, a very dislikable character, arguably more so than Mr. Birling, I would say. Okay, Sheila Burling. I always found like the ribbon on her head really like just a weird choice to me. It feels like something that's from like a box of chocolates they just kind of shoved on her head before she went on camera, but that's just me. So she's quite superficial. She's quite immature at the start. She's like, oh, look at my pretty ring. Not that that's kind of problematic, but the fact that they kind of zoom in on that and her kind of focusing on that token. She says she only feels engaged once she has that ring, as though she didn't really feel engaged before, as though she has to have that token to show that she is engaged. So she's quite superficial. She's quite impulsive, in terms of the way that she treats Eva Smith. but at the same time she's passionate, she's full of emotion. Sheila is, more than any other character, I would say. She's got a wide emotional range, you know, going from she cries quietly in the corner, to, you know, being really passionate about her relationship with Gerald, to be very upset with her relationship with Gerald. But at the same time she becomes much more mature. She responds quite maturely. She has a few snipes at Gerald, but she responds quite maturely to the fact that she's found out he's cheated. You know, responds that she knew something was going on the whole time, which is why I say that she's very shrewd and actually one of the most intelligent characters in the play. She's certainly the most intelligent character, aside from the inspector that we get to meet. Eva Smith as well is quite intelligent, but you know, she's much more kind of open-minded and open to change than her parents, setting, you know, her and Eric in a completely different category to the older generation and to Gerald. Hang on, bear with. Okay, I'm back. Let's ignore the fact I had a phone call mid YouTube video. Okay then. So she's quite remorseful and penitent. She kind of, you know, is regretful over what's happened to Eva Smith. And again, she really shows that kind of wide emotional spectrum, from someone who is, you know, perhaps quite immature and, you know, quite young, that she can't really control her emotions yet. But she's well-meaning underneath it. You know, aside from the fact that she had Eva Smith. Eva Smith fired from Millwoods, but you know, she's arguably one of the most likable characters, if not, apart from in the Inspector and Eva Smith, you know, the most likable character. I mean Edna, but she's kind of like a smaller role. So she says, you know, but these girls aren't cheap labor. They're people. She recognises they're real people. They're not just, you know, commodities. You not only knew her, but you knew her very well. So she's very shrewd, and she knows that Gerald, she kind of is able to guess that he's been sleeping with her. She questions, this is something I find quite interesting, she questions whether Eva Smith is pretty. And for me, that kind of shows she's quite superficial, because it's like, you know, knowing that she's pretty all of a sudden makes it worse that she's dead. Sheila Burling herself is described as a pretty girl in her early 20s by Priestley in the stage directions. And so it's kind of, you could say that, you know, it's almost kind of, if you've watched Mean Girls, to me, it almost feels a bit like that, because it's like, well, is it another pretty girl? Well, we're more worried if it's a pretty girl. But again, I'm just kind of inferring that. So take that from that what we will. But I think that's a really interesting quote that is very much not looked at in An Inspector Calls. Okay then, so Eric Birling, my least favourite character. He's very indulged and spoiled in my mind, in terms of he's able to kind of run around town and get drunk, and the way he kind of speaks to his parents, he acts quite spoiled. But at the same time, he's also disregarded by his parents. So we kind of see that's, for me, partly why he's kind of this, he's half at ease, half assertive. He's kind of, you know, he's got this wealth, and comes from this you know, upper middle class family, but at the same time he's very disregarded by them. You know, he's quite uncomfortable in that family kind of environment. He's very immature and impulsive, and he's very, and for me, he's sinful, I think, is a good way to describe it without getting angry, because basically it's insinuated that he basically sexually assaults Eva, and also he's a heavy drinker as well, so he indulges in sins, and so for me, like, I would, the best way to describe him is he's quite a sinful character, but at the same time he is remorseful, he is penitent. It actually, for me, is quite I find him quite irritating, because he's very, you know, he goes on at the other characters for everything that they've done, but you know, arguably he's done the worst thing to Eva Smith. I've also said, for me, he's quite lost. He's quite a lost soul, because he doesn't have a good relationship with his parents. But he works at the parents' company, perhaps not doing what he wants to do. You know, again, that's an inference. You know, we don't really know much about Eric's personality. We kind of like drip fed things. But you know, we know that he does seem quite lost and quite disregarded. And yeah, he describes that he doesn't want to go off and marry one of these old women around the town. You know, he hasn't found someone yet. But you know, for me, he does come across as quite a lost character. Just keep quiet, Eric. Mr. Birling says, I threatened to make a row, when basically he forces himself on Eva Smith, and he's described as not quite at ease, potentially because he's hiding the secret that he's got a girl pregnant out of wedlock. So, you know, probably why he's quite uncomfortable. Okay, so we've magically changed location now. Right, okay then, so on to Gerald Croft then. someone I was reading online said that Gerald's one of the most interesting characters in the play. He kind of sits in between both like the older generation and the younger generation in terms of his views, and kind of creates some sort of balance to that kind of dichotomy, because he allows the older and the young generation to not be split so definitively, because he is of the younger generation but his views are more in line with the old generation. So like I say, it kind of means that there's not a really clean split, showing that it's not just all the old people are bad and the young people are good. It isn't like that. It's about your worldviews and your ability to change, really, as well, your kind of malleability. Okay, then, so Gerald Croft is very pompous in terms of the way he kind of talks about his family's business. He uses it when he calls the infirmary. He's quite pretentious, not nowhere near as much as like Mrs. Birling, for example, but it is definitely there. Whether he is kind to not Sheila, he is kind to Daisy Renton, but he's quite unfeeling to Sheila because he doesn't think about how she's going to feel when he cheats on her, and he doesn't say when he's talking about it, he doesn't really apologise to Sheila, and she picks it up on it, and she's kind of like, that's not really okay. He's exploitative. He exploits. He exploits Daisy Renton, and he's opportunistic as well, because he installs her at the flat, even though he says that the apartment, even though he says, I didn't do it to have sex with her. That's exactly what he does. So he's able to kind of choose someone who's clearly hard on their luck, Daisy, and then he exploits that situation in order to have sex with her. And he even admits that he doesn't know if he loved her, so he doesn't feel the same that she felt for him, because she was deeply in love with him. And so because of that, he's untrustworthy. But he's also quite sensitive. We can see in the quote here that he's rather more upset about this business than he appears to be. So he's more upset about Daisy committing suicide. So that shows he is sensitive. Again, he's wealthy. We're told that he's attractive, and he's also quite relaxed, really. Even towards the end, when he's found out all of this, he seems quite relaxed when he's explaining his theories about the inspector. He's quite calm about it, probably because he's had a wealthy upbringing. He's never really had to worry about much. He's quite calm in situations because he usually knows that he's got the upper hand because he's so privileged. Okay, then Inspector Gould. He's very intelligent. He's obviously very responsible, but he's also very ominous, enigmatic, and cryptic. So he's quite mysterious, and we, because of that supernatural element as well, with the name Ghoul, largely being thought to be relating to a ghoul, as in Ghoul, like a ghost. There's a lot we don't understand about him, which makes he's quite ghost-like and uncanny. Again, he's actually described as peculiar and suspicious by Birling. An interesting word used to describe him is omniscient. So it's when I was looking for a word to describe him, he's all-knowing. This is often a word assigned when we're talking about gods, for example, that they're omniscient, they're all-knowing. It appears that he knows everything about everyone that he shouldn't know. But also he's quite professional as well, because he won't drink on the job. He deals with one line of inquiry at a time. On the flip side, you could say that perhaps he's also he's overly serious. Maybe he's untrustworthy because we don't understand where he's come from. Is he a hoax? Is he a ghost? But overall, I do think peculiar and suspicious really helps kind of sum up what the characters think about him, and partly what we think about him as well. Okay, so Edna, quiet, obedient, respectful, but important. Okay, Edna represents the lower classes. She's the only physical representation of the lower classes that we actually meet, because we don't get to meet Eva Smith, who we're going to move on to in a moment. So you can see that she calls Birling Sir. She'll never call him Mr. Birling. She's very respectful. She knows her place. She's symbolic of the system of power and the system of class that keeps her in her place. And so she's important in that respect. She's also the first character that's referred to in the play, because they're talking about I think it's about Edna's getting the port, which is a symbol of wealth as well. So kind of bossing the lower classes around, which you're going to see reflected in Eva Smith as well. So an important one. Eva Smith stroke Daisy Renton then. Please note, and I just want to say this, now this is from the BBC version. If you've watched the BBC version, that's fine. I actually really, really like that version. However, the only problem is that they physically show you Eva Smith. We are never meant to see Eva Smith, because she's meant to be faceless and just one of the many. So she's this invisible, silent kind of character, and I'll come back to that idea in a moment. She's ill-fated. It's unfortunate these circumstances she's in, but she is brave. She stands up to Mr. Birling and leads to her getting fired. She's intelligent. She understands that Eric doesn't love her, and that's why she won't marry him. She's resilient. She tries and tries again. On the other hand, you could say maybe she's not that resilient after the whole thing with Gerald and getting fired twice. She said that she doesn't really want to try for a job again. But you could just say it's because she's been dealt such a difficult hand, and she's been having so many bad things happen to her. It's understandable it's made her miserable, which I referenced down there. She is loving and romantic. She refers to the fact that in her diary that Gerald, she wants it to last long with Gerald mentally in her head, so she goes away to the seaside to be alone. Some of the film versions cut that out, so that's quite a good thing to write down. She is trapped, as I said, with Edna, by this system of oppression in society. She's trapped by the class system. She's not physically trapped. The only person that she's physically trapped by is Eric, but she is symbolically trapped by society and by the other characters' actions. And she feels obviously mentally trapped as well, because it's leading to her suicide. She feels like she can't escape the condition that she's in, and she can't be perhaps she can't provide for her baby as well. Rather than saying she's poor, it's better to say that she's deprived, for example, and of the lower classes. So here's a couple of the quotes. Lively, good-looking girl. Very positive quotes generally about Eva Smith. I was sorry for her. She was young and pretty and warm-hearted and intensely grateful. Quite a nice succession there of adjectives. If you want to look at that list there, it's quite interesting. Okay then, I in particular want to think about Eva Smith as one of these millions and millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths. We don't live alone. Smith being one of the most common surnames in the country, and partly why it's chosen. You can see I've got an image here from 1945 and an image from 2020. In 1945 when it was written, and in 2020 it's just as relevant. This message is that we are all connected, we are all together. Eva Smith represents all of us in society, and the things that we can do to each other, this interconnected kind of spider web that society is, the way we're all connected to one another in ways that we don't even know. So you want to think about, when you're writing about these characters, how relevant are they today? Can we see these people today? Absolutely. Eva Smith represents the working class today as well. Okay, if you want to do a bit of stretch and challenge, I suggest that you check out Alderman Megati. He's a really good and very minor character that's just referenced. He's the one that was kind of forcing himself onto Eva Smith in the palace bar, and Gerald kind of like rescues her from him. He's like the fairy prince. For me, Alderman Megati is what Eric will become in the future potentially. He's this drunk around town, pushing himself onto women, and I think he's quite an interesting one to look at if you're looking for the high grades, a bit of stretch and challenge as well. Okay, so if you're looking to do a bit of extension work, if you could check out this, please. If I was you, I'd complete more research on these characters, potentially make a revision process, which is the one on the right here, and then you might want to create an essay plan based on each of the characters. What else I think you should do is, I think you should think about how each of the characters construct major themes in the text, and I am going to be doing a video on themes in Inspector Calls. How does Gerald contribute to the theme of power? How does Gerald contribute to the theme of responsibility? How does Eva contribute to the presentation of wealth, for example? It's quite a random example, but yeah. So if you're stuck for essay questions, just let me know and I'll give you a hand. Hopefully that was very helpful.